Hello there and welcome. I'm glad you can make it back. My name is Michael Fudge, and this is Lesson 2 in our series on learning programming in Java. In this episode, we'll talk about variables, data types, the assignment statement, and some basic operators like the arithmetic operators. Here's a quick tour of our agenda. We'll first start out with a couple of slides on variables, what a variable is and how it works. What are data types? We'll also take a look at the assignment statement. Then we'll dive into an example. We'll run the example. I'll also show you how you can debug the example and add watches. Then we'll jump back out and talk about some of the different other operators that are available. Have a brief discussion on type consistency that's demonstrated in our final example of the day. As we mentioned in the previous lesson, variables are simply named locations in memory which store data of a certain type. And for this analogy, I have two containers. A container is a variable, is sort of like a container because it holds a value. The container on the left, the flower pot, holds herbs or flowers or houseplants, maybe small trees. The container on the right, a drinking glass, holds water or soda or beer or milk. The idea is that while they're both containers, they hold different things because their purpose is different. And this is the same thing. This is akin to a data type, right? So we might have a data type that holds integers, and you can put a 7 in there, or a 3 or a 4. And then you might have another data type that holds strings, and you could put in someone's name or their favorite color. The variable, again, is just a place in memory. It's a placeholder in memory, but the shape of that variable determines the type of data that can go into it. The actual data that goes into the variable, those are literal values, such as numbers or strings or true-false values. Here are the popular Java data types and some examples of the data that represent that type. So in the first line we have integers. Those are represented by the data type int. And 1, 2, 3, -99, those are examples of integers. There's more to it than that, but we'll get into some of those details as we go along. There's basic characters, which is a single character, like anything you would type on the keyboard that represents a character. Then there's sequences of characters. These are known as strings. Sometimes we need to represent a number that has a decimal point. In that case, we want to use a double. For example, I have 12.04 and I have -128.45, blah, 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 blah. And the number 0 would be 0.0 as a double. And then there's true-false values. Those are called booleans. You can also have an expression, and that expression evaluates to a true-false type or a Boolean type. We call those Boolean expressions. Okay, let's take the concept of data type, variable, data itself or value, and getting that value into the variable and put it all in context with a Java statement. This statement is called an assignment statement. And the assignment statement, what it does is it takes a value and places it in a variable. It sets the variable to that value. The equals sign is the operator that performs the assignment. The whole statement that you see in front of you actually does two things. It declares a variable of a type and then assigns a value to that type. As we saw in the previous lesson, you can break these up into two separate statements, but it is common to, when you create a variable, to give it an initial value. Okay, it's time to do some code. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a program that's going to ask us for some things like our name and our age, our grade point average, and then it's going to output a message containing all of that information. We're going to start out by hard coding in the data into our variables, and then after we kind of walk through that and see how that works, we'll write a more interactive version that will ask us or prompt us for the data and then store that into the variables before it prints out our information. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to start out by creating a new project. You certainly don't have to follow along with me if you don't want. You can always open up the example from GitHub and follow along with a running example. Some people like to learn by kind of coding along with me. Others just kind of like to watch and soak it all in. The beauty of me recording these lectures is that you can go back and watch them as many times as you want and take a lot of different approaches. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a new project, although this project does already exist out on GitHub. And I'm going to name this project, let's call this Interactive Common Data Types. Okay, I did a little cleanup, and here's my main routine. Remember, this is the method that represents the entry point of our program. When we execute our program, everything inside this main method will run. And again, what I want to do is I want to store a name, an age, and a GPA. So let's create some data types and variables. So we'll need a string, name, an int age, and a double GPA. Now I need to give these variables values, so let's do this. Name equals Mike. And again, because it's data, I put it in quote. And my age 41. My GPA was a nice big fat 3.9, we'll say. It's all made up. Now I'd like to print out this information. So I'm going to use system out printf. And I'm just going to say something like the person's name is somebody years old. Person's name has a GPA. This might take a little bit of time for you to kind of wrap your head around what's happening here, but in the printf statement, there are format specifiers for the different types of variables. So %s is for a string, %d is for an integer, %f is for a floating point value. So now what I need to do is provide these arguments. So here goes. So I'm going to put in name, then age, then name again, then GPA. Name matches up with this %s. Age matches up with the %d. This name matches up with that %s, and GPA matches up with the last one. Now because it all doesn't fit on a line, I'm just going to move it down like this. Right? I can easily break up any statement into multiple lines. I can also have more than one statement on the same line. Generally, you do this for legibility, and that's what I did here. So let's give this a run now and see what happens. Mike is 41 years old. Mike has a 3.9000 GPA. So a couple things stand out. First of all, why is it 3.900000? Well, if a double is of a certain precision, and no matter what value we put in for that double, GPA 3.9, it always stores it with the same number of decimal places. If I want to print it with only a certain number, like most GPAs only go out to 3, then I can specify that in the format specifier. I could say 4.3, which means use 3 digits, or 4 digits, 3 to the right of the decimal. Now I get, this is more akin to what a real GPA would look like. While this program's great, we could make it better. The first way we'll make it better is by eliminating the redundancy of declaring the variable and then assigning a value to it. We're going to do this all in one statement. So let me adjust that. There we have it. So now what I'm doing is I'm creating the variable name and then assigning a value, creating the variable age, assigning a value, etc. If we run this, it does the same thing. What would make this example even better is if we ask the user to enter their name, enter their age, and enter their GPA, and then print out that message. To do that requires a little more work, and you also need to reintroduce our friend, the scanner class. So let's get started here. Scanner, input, new of system in. And again, we're getting our famous error here, and this is because we need to import the package that contains the definition for the class scanner. There it is. I hit Control-Shift-I to bring up this. It's called Fix All Imports. This is a NetBeans feature. It's very useful. And what it does is it will automatically add the import statement that I need. Let me do that again in super slow-mo. Control-Shift-I. Okay. See how it added that up there for me? Awesome. Again, you need that because this program does not know what a scanner is. Scanner, the definition of scanner, is contained in this package. I need to include that package into my program to use it. Okay, moving on, let's start to ask for this information. I'm going to say system out print enter your name. How about enter student's name? How about a system out print enter student's GPA? And system print enter student's age. Okay, I've got my prints in there. What I'm not doing is I'm not asking for input. So if I run this right now, what you see is kind of like a mess. It just says enter student's name, enter student's GPA, enter student's age, and then it prints out my results. At no point did I tell Java to accept input from the user. That's what I have to do next. So when I print enter a student's name, the next thing I want to do is accept input for that. So I'm going to say, please assign name to input.next line. Please assign GPA to input.next dot next double. Please assign age to input dot next int. You can see how the scanner class is very useful because you can specify what type of data you want to accept input for and then store that into the variable of the same type. Now if I ask for next double and I put in a string, it's going to throw what's called an exception. It's going to blow up. And that would be expected. Later on in the class we'll learn how you can write code to handle exceptions. It's general rule of thumb, anytime you're doing any form of input or interfacing with another system or process, you want to wrap that in an exception handler so that you make sure that you're not going to blow things up and cause your program to halt unexpectedly. I think what I have so far looks pretty good. I'm going to try and squeeze it all on the screen before I run it. Okay, that should work. Let's go ahead and run it. Enter student's name, Michael. Enter student's GPA, 3.945. Enter student's age, 35. Michael is 35 years old. He has a 3.945 GPA. Pretty neat. Okay, now that we have a working program, let's go back and talk a little bit about debugging. One of the things you might want to do is run through this program line by line to see what's happening to your variables. There's an important element to debugging called a watch, and what a watch does is allow you to put a condition or a variable that you can inspect while the program runs so you can see how it changes. And this is a very useful way to solve the problems in code. So you might think you wrote it right, but you didn't. Great way to figure out what exactly you did wrong, where your disconnect is to put a watch in there. So, all right, so let me add a watch. I'm going to go up to debug, and down here it says new watch. You can also hit Control Shift F7 to do that. So I'm going to add a watch. Let me add a watch to the variable name, and then Control Shift F7. Let me add a watch to GPA, and then another watch for age. Now you can see it brought up a variables window, and right now it doesn't know anything about these variables, and you wouldn't expect it to know anything about these variables because the program's not running. The next thing I need to do is I need to put a breakpoint in here. The breakpoint will stop execution when it reaches the breakpoint line, and then from there I can inspect the variables. I can inspect what's going on in the computer's memory. So I'm going to do something silly and put the breakpoint right in the beginning. So what this is going to do is it's going to run and it's going to stop when it reaches line 9. And then from there I can inspect what's going on down here, and I'm going to step through this code a line at a time, and you can watch these variables get initialized and then values be placed in them. So let's check it out. Again, I cannot run this. I have to debug this, so I'm going to go up here and use debug project rather than run. So debug project. All of a sudden I'm on this line here, which means I'm about to run this line. If I look at variables, you see that there's no type and there's no value for these variables because they have not been initialized yet. They don't get initialized till further down in the program. So I'm going to hit this button here, which is step over. It's F8. I'm going to be pushing F8 as I go through this process. So check this out. It's about to run this line here. You'll watch, and then name will be initialized as type string with value Mike. There it is. In the next line, age will be initialized as type int with value 41. And GPA will be initialized with value 39 of type double. Pretty cool. As I progress through the program, this line here, line 15, is going to take input from the user and replace the value Mike with whatever I type. So check it out. Now the program's waiting. I need to go to the output window. It's waiting for me to type something in. I'm going to type in Tony. And then I'm going to go back to variables and check it out. And now name says Tony. So assignment replaces the value that's in the variable. It doesn't append or anything like that. When you assign it, it takes that box and replaces it. It's like if you had a glass of soda and you assign milk to it. Now you have a glass of milk. What was in the soda is gone. If there was soda in the glass, the soda is gone. Let's continue on with our program here. Now it's waiting again, and it's asking me for a GPA, and I can put in 2.8. Then if I go back to variables, I can see that this now says 2.8. So I won't continue to run the program any further line by line, but at this point maybe I just want to execute it out. So that's this green button here. It's also continue, the F5 key, so I push that. And now it's just going to continue to run the program as normal. Enter student's age, 19 years old. Tony is 19 years old. Tony has a 2.8 GPA. Next, we're going to enhance this program, but before we do that, we need to go back and learn about some more operators. Some of the most common Java operators out there are the arithmetic operators. These are the operators that perform math. For example, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and the very useful yet misunderstood modulo or remainder operator. So when you divide 7 divided by 3, the answer, since 7 and 3 are integers, is 2. But there's a remainder of 1. If you want to get the remainder of division, you use the modulo operator. So 7 modulo 3 is 1. 8 modulo 3 is 2. 9 modulo 3 is 0. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Another super handy operator that we're going to use is called the ternary operator, or the immediate if operator. This allows you to evaluate an expression for a Boolean value, a true-false value, and then you can perform some kind of action based on that true or false value. For example, I have is your GPA greater than 3.2? If it is, you're Dean's List. If not, you're not Dean's List. So I have this string Dean's List for when you're bigger than 3.2, or I have nothing if you don't have a GPA bigger than 3.2. So let's go back and modify our code. We're going to modify our code to be a little smart. It's going to have a little gender detection in there. We're also going to have this notion of whether you made the Dean's List. And then we'll also calculate how many years you are from retirement. So if I'm 65 years old and retirement is at 70, then it's 5 years from retirement. Let's see if we can add these features to our program. Okay, in classic cooking show fashion, I've made some small modifications to my Java program. Most notably, I now have this line here that declares age, retirement as 70, and then days till as 0. And then I also added another variable, Boolean, of type Boolean, that says is female. And then in lines 21 and 22, I'm asking, are you female? Type true or false. And then I'm accepting that Boolean input and storing it in is female. Now I need to modify my end sentence to handle all of my cases. So let's start with first dealing with the male or female. If you remember how the program ran before, it would say Tony is 19 years old. Tony has a 2.8 GPA. I'd love for it to say Tony is 19 years old. He has a 2.8 GPA. Let's get that part working first. Here's where I'm saying Tony is 19 years old. Tony has something GPA. And it says Tony, age, that, right? So what I want to do here is let's make another string here. And since I'm uncreative, I'm going to call this he, she. And I'm just going to set that to he. Doesn't really matter. I can set it to an empty string. And then what I want to do is I'm going to use assignment. After I accept all the inputs, I'm going to say he, she equals is female. I'm going to use my ternary operator. If you're female, it should be she. Otherwise, it should be he. And then instead of showing name here, I'm going to show he, she. Let's give it a run. Enter student's name, Bill, 3.4, 20. Are you female? False. Bill is 20 years old. He has a 3.4 GPA. Let's run it again. Sarah, 2.91, 24. True. Sarah is 24 years old. She has a 2.10 GPA. You might be wondering what's happening right here on line 23. And you know what we'll do? We'll put a breakpoint on line 22 and show you in a sec. But let's handle the other case as far as retirement goes. So days till retirement should be retirement minus the age. So if you say you're 70 years old, then you're at retirement. And then let's add that to our print statement. So so-and-so is X years old, and then let's say %D years to retirement. He has a something GPA. And that looks good. Now we have name, age, and then days till. Let's put a breakpoint right here on line 22. Let's go back and give it a run with a debug and see how it all unfolds. Enter student name, Michael, GPA 2.987, student's age, 38. Are you female? False. Now it's waiting on this line until I do something. Let's take a look at our variables. So this is what's kind of interesting is you can add watches, but there's also automatic watches. If you look down here, he, she is a string and it's nothing, and days till is an int and that's nothing. So I don't really need to add these watches up here. It's nice and useful to add watches to specific conditions that you want to watch, especially when there's tons of these auto watches and you have to kind of filter and sift through them. But let me just see how this unfolds using the automatic watches. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F8 to step through this. So now it's going to say is female. If you look, I hovered over it, is female is false. So it's not going to return she, it's going to return he. Let's take a look at he, she and see what it says. Now it says he. Days till is retirement, which is 70, minus age, which is 38. 70 minus 38 is some number. It's 32. And then let's print it out. Let's continue with F5 and print the rest out. Michael is 38 years old, 32 years to retirement. He has a 2.87 GPA. Cool. And that concludes our lesson on variables and the assignment statement. There's more to come in future lessons, obviously, where we deal with how do you divide different types of data, like if you divide an int by a float, and how do you convert data from one type to another. These are all issues that we'll talk about in a future lesson. Thank you very much, and again, if you have comments, don't hesitate to post them on YouTube. Bye now.